My name is Max Pemberton. I'm a doctor, a journalist and editor of Spectator Health. In recent years, more and more the government has looked to industry and big business to help it deliver on public health initiatives. A key aspect to this is that it's in the interest of business to diversify and innovate, and through this, they will develop healthier, better products. But can we really trust businesses to innovate? Do they have a duty to the public good or just to their shareholders? I want to explore where the responsibilities lie for improving people's health. Is it with the government? Is it with individuals? Or is it with industry? To start off with, I'm going to speak to Dr Sarah Jarvis. She's an NHS GP and she's also on the medical board for the charity Drinkaware, which promotes sensible drinking. Sarah, one of the policies that medicine has adopted in recent years is that of harm reduction. Can you explain what that actually means?
The trouble is, in an ideal world, we'd love it if everybody had the healthiest of balanced diets with 7 portions of vegetable and fruit, exercise for half an hour, 5 days a week, was not remotely overweight, had never touched a cigarette in their lives, and drank 2 glasses of wine a week. It doesn't happen. And it's not going to happen. So unfortunately what we see is if we go around banging on about how this is the only way to live healthily, then people just say, well, I can't do that, so I might as well not bother. Effectively, I think a much more realistic way of doing it is saying, let's look at how we can help you to make small changes. And the classic example was the guidance which came out from NICE on smoking, where they were talking not about smoking cessation and about saying, right, there is only one way to go. We need to think as an alternative about reducing tobacco-related harm. So what we're talking to people about now is alternatives. There's a lot of controversy about vaping, and I don't think there's any doubt that we don't have enough proof, if it's ever going to be there, to say it is completely safe. But what we do know is that it's considerably less harmful than smoking. So therefore, we've moved from saying we're not going to recommend it because we don't know if it's completely safe to saying, actually, we may not know it's completely safe, but we do know that you can considerably reduce harm by switching from normal cigarettes to vaping or by using nicotine replacement therapy long-term rather than just using it for the short term while you're trying to get off cigarettes.
As a strategy, how successful has harm reduction been?
If you look at countries like, say, Finland, where they had a huge national push towards reducing their incredibly high rate of heart attack and stroke, they managed to cut the rate of heart attack and stroke in Finland by 2/3 over the course of not more than a decade. So 70% of strokes and heart attacks gone almost overnight. Why? Because the government said, you need to do this, you need to make dramatic changes, you need to jump, and the population said, how high?
To what extent do you think business or industry should be involved in public health initiatives?
I think industry has an enormously important part to play in public health initiatives, and the food industry is an absolutely classic example of that. In the last 10 years, the amount of salt in tomato ketchup in the UK, like the amount of salt in cornflakes a few years earlier, has gone down considerably. But that's because every company has worked together. They've worked with public health and they've done it very, very gradually so that the population hasn't noticed it happening, and we're now not used to it.
You've been involved in Drinkaware. It's funded by the drinks industry, so why should we believe what it tells us?
Well, from my perspective, I worked with it for a very long time. I am aware that in some other countries there has been controversy about how closely their country's Drinkaware has worked with their government, but they are completely independent of ours. All I can say to you is, as a member of the medical advisory panel, I have never been told what to do. I've never been told to change anything that I do, and anything that we take to them, they take seriously.
To what extent do you think that the individual should take responsibility for their health versus government or industry?
So yes, people do need to take responsibility, but unfortunately these are addictions. And in the NHS, we do not, nor should we, discriminate against people on the basis of their life choices or whether their illnesses are caused by their life choices or by simple bad luck.
Sarah seems really positive about the role that industry has had in harm reduction. She still sees, though, the main thrust of initiatives coming from government, though. I wanted to know what the libertarian perspective was. Sam Bowman is Executive Director of the Adam Smith Institute. a think tank that champions individual choice. I'm wary of placing the responsibility wholly in industry because some people would argue they're often part of the problem. To what extent do you think they can also be part of the solution?
I think we shouldn't be expecting the industry to do this kind of out of the goodness of their own hearts. Really, for them, it's about profit, and that's actually a good thing. There's been a big shift among smokers and among drinkers in the last couple of years. In part, we have to say, thanks to the government's very sort of stern anti-drinking, anti-smoking campaigns, a big shift towards the idea of harm reduction and towards the idea that these things have costs and benefits. Now, as a liberal, I think that we should let people decide whether the benefits outweigh the costs to them. But if there is a demand for products that are lower cost but still pretty high benefits, things like e-cigarettes or things like synthetic alcohol, and the industry kind of wants to satisfy that demand, there's an incentive for them to provide better products and to provide safer products. Now, what we're talking about today is products that are superior in safety terms. So if you're a business, you can offer, for example, an e-cigarette or some other kind of reduced risk tobacco product that's almost as good as a cigarette but significantly safer, then you will, we assume, attract more smokers who care about their health. I think what we should trust is in competition and in the kind of legal mechanisms that we have to punish firms that are dishonest. And so it's that kind of mechanism of competition that I generally think maintains standards.
Isn't the easiest answer for government to simply ban things that are detrimental to people's health?
Certainly, government has a role in educating people if that education isn't taking place kind of privately. I think perhaps we go too far in the direction of trying to scare people off and trying to sort of our only metric is reducing the number of smokers or reducing the number of drinkers. What I would like to see is metrics that look at the benefits and the costs to people and check that people know about the costs that they're incurring onto themselves. That's the role for government, really, because when it comes to adults, we generally in a liberal society think that nobody except the individual themselves is equipped to know whether the costs outweigh the benefits.
What are your thoughts on synthetic alcohol? I mean, that's like a perfect example of innovation that has come up against government legislation, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, synthetic alcohol is a really interesting example. It reputedly does the same thing to your brain that alcohol does, but doesn't do the same thing to your liver, to the rest of your internal organs that alcohol does. So it causes much less long-term damage. I think that this should go through very rigorous checks to make sure that these claims are actually true. That's not what the government is doing. The government is really just treating this like it's, poison, and not giving it any kind of route through testing, through a kind of an approvals process where all we need to do is find out what it does and then inform consumers about what it does so that they can make a choice for themselves. That's what I think the real key for government is now, is to create a regulatory pathway from the point of developing a drug like this to testing it and to marketing it to consumers. That doesn't exist at the moment.
Finally, I'm going to speak to Chris Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. I want to know whether it's actually good business for companies to innovate and produce products that actually reduce harm. Should industry take a lead in addressing public health concerns rather than just waiting to be asked?
I think when it comes to innovation in hazardous product categories, it's bound to be industry who lead the way. The government is unlikely to come up with any novel innovations itself. The businesses have got huge incentives. There's a serious demand for low sugar drinks, for smoking to be made less hazardous, for drinking to be made safer. So I think the basic laws of supply and demand mean that businesses will respond, and they're really the only people who can respond.
Is it actually good business for companies to produce products, things like, say, electric cars, low alcohol beer, low fat foods?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of money up for grabs for any company that can come up with something that reduces the negatives from a product, reduces the risks, reduces the cost, whatever it may be. It's a basic cost-benefit analysis. If you can reduce those costs in terms of health risks and the kind of examples you're giving there, you've got a massive competitive advantage and everybody else will just have to follow you.
What about harm reduction? Should or can industry be part of the solution, do you think?
Well, there's various types of tobacco harm reduction, and if you look at the most obvious and oldest one, it's nicotine patches and nicotine gum. Again, they came from business, from the pharmaceutical industry. More recently, you've had Swedish snus, a tobacco product, and of course e-cigarettes and other products along the way, such as heat not burn. So these have all come from business primarily. And I think it's only natural that it should do. I think obviously they have to have a part to play. I think they've got a very major part to play because they're the ones who have the know-how, have the money, and have the incentives to do it.
Does anyone trust industry to be unbiased in the research that they conduct?
Well, I don't see why the taxpayer should have to be paying for businesses to do research. It seems to me that their R&D should be something that comes out of their own budget. And I don't think it's really a question of trust. I think it should just go through the peer-reviewed journals, be put up in front of the scientific academy as you would any other form of research. Trust shouldn't really be a part of it at all.
From my conversations, it seems the industry does have a critical role in harm reduction and public health initiatives. The biggest innovations in public health, from e-cigarettes to electric cars, have come from industry, not government. It's clear, though, that these are only part of the solution. There has to be government frameworks in place to enable innovation, and also the individual has to take ultimate responsibility for harm reduction.